Of course, dear mother, go ahead and take everything to repay the debt of 18 years of raising me, I said, staring dead into the eyes of the woman trying to rob me. I am Shannon, 23 years old, and I recently bought a modern apartment in downtown Austin. Instead of congratulations, my mother showed up demanding $400,000 for raising me. She fully intended to strip my home bare, but she had no idea what was waiting in my hands. Welcome back to the channel. If you love satisfying stories where toxic relatives face brutal reality, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's dive in. The deafening pounding on my door shattered the quiet of my Saturday morning. As I swung the door open, I immediately faced the furious glare of my mother. Right behind her stood my older sister, crossing her arms with a jealous smirk. The scene became even more ridiculous when I noticed two unfamiliar movers standing in the hallway. They held heavy lifting straps and were fully prepared to invade the sanctuary I had worked relentlessly for years to secure. My mother aggressively demanded I hand over my belongings. She arrogantly claimed the right to seize my furniture and my new home to settle the imaginary debt of her parenting. Instead of panicking or surrendering my keys as they expected, I stood my ground at the threshold without stepping back a single inch. My cold gaze swept over the chaotic group before I slowly raised a small pink box to eye level. This box contained the brutal financial truth powerful enough to completely crush their endless greed within the next few minutes. This cruel favoritism didn't just explode today. It had been deeply rooted in my life since I was a child. The discrimination in our family was glaringly obvious through every minor detail of our daily existence. While Courtney's closet was constantly overflowing with brand new designer outfits with the price tag still attached, my wardrobe consisted entirely of her faded hand-me-downs. I spent my early teenage years squeezing into jeans that were 2 sizes too small and wearing worn-out sweaters that had lost their shape long ago. If I ever dared to ask for a new pair of shoes for school, Mom would simply roll her eyes and tell me to stop being ungrateful. She never saw the need to spend a single dime on my appearance because she firmly believed only her golden child deserved to shine. The financial exploitation began the exact moment I turned 14. Mom immediately forced me to get a part-time job working the grueling evening shifts at a local fast food restaurant. I would come home late every night, smelling heavily of cheap frying oil and utter exhaustion, only to find Courtney lounging comfortably on the living room couch watching television. However, the hardest part was not the physical labor itself, but the infuriating fact that I never got to keep the money I earned. Mom confiscated nearly my entire paycheck the second I walked through the front door. "You eat the food in this house and sleep under my roof, so you need to contribute to the living expenses," she would state coldly. She would slip my hard-earned cash directly into her own wallet and then immediately hand Courtney a generous allowance for a weekend shopping trip. The blatant injustice reached an entirely new level regarding our transportation. On Courtney's 16th birthday, Mom proudly presented her with the keys to a shiny personal car so she could comfortably hang out with her friends and drive to school in style. I received absolutely nothing of the sort when my turn came. Instead, I had to wake up before dawn every single morning and walk miles in the freezing rain just to catch the public bus. I distinctly remember standing at that uncovered bus stop, shivering violently in my thin jacket, watching Courtney speed by in her warm, heated vehicle without ever slowing down to offer me a ride. Mom always defended her actions by claiming Courtney needed her independence, deliberately ignoring my basic safety. That same toxic financial pattern followed us straight into our university years. When Courtney was accepted into college, Mom enthusiastically paid her tuition in full without missing a single cent. She covered the expensive dorm fees, the textbooks, and provided a hefty monthly stipend so her favorite daughter could enjoy the college experience stress-free. Meanwhile, I was left entirely on my own to figure out how to continue my education. I had to sit in the financial aid office completely alone, signing my name on massive student loan documents that chained me to a mountain of debt. They thought they were keeping me permanently under their control, but that constant pressure and relentless suppression actually forged my iron will. Every stolen paycheck and every freezing morning at the bus stop taught me a vital lesson about survival. I realized extremely early on that I could never rely on the illusion of a loving mother. I understood clearly that I had to make my own money and plan my permanent escape from that toxic household the exact second I turned 18. 1 week before this ridiculous event took place, Mom called me after 6 full months of complete radio silence the exact moment she heard the news about my real estate purchase. She somehow discovered through a mutual acquaintance that I had successfully finalized the paperwork for a premium condominium right in the heart of downtown Austin. There was absolutely no warm greeting or any congratulatory remarks regarding my hard-earned achievement when I answered the phone. Instead, she abruptly instructed me to check my personal email inbox because she had just forwarded an important document. I opened the message and stared in sheer disbelief at a meticulously formatted Excel spreadsheet attached to the email. She had actually taken the time to manually itemize every single supposed expense she incurred while raising me before my 18th birthday. The rows contained outrageous daily charges for basic childhood meals, mandatory public school supplies, medical copays, and even the cheap thrift store clothes I was forced to wear. She tallied up these ridiculous line items to present me with a fabricated debt, totaling exactly $187,000. I bluntly told her I would never pay a single cent of this delusional invoice because providing basic necessities for a child is a legal obligation, not a financial loan. The moment I firmly rejected her extortion attempt, Mom instantly dropped her initial tactic and revealed her true underlying motive for the phone call. If you don't have the cash, you have to let your sister move in for free. She needs a temporary place to stay, and this is a family responsibility. She shrieked aggressively through the receiver. She coldly demanded that I hand over the keys to Courtney, who had recently finalized her divorce and currently had nowhere else to live. Mom insisted that if I refused to provide free housing for my older sister, I must legally transfer partial ownership of my new property directly into Courtney's name to ensure her future financial stability. I pressed the end call button, immediately refusing to waste another breath arguing with her manipulative insanity. I knew from past experiences that Mom would never just let this go, so I proactively initiated my defense strategy. I quickly dialed the number for my lawyer David to explain the urgent situation regarding her aggressive property demands. David, trace all the old bank transactions. I need the files ready by this week. I instructed him the second he answered the line. I directed him to conduct a comprehensive legal review of all my financial records spanning the last decade, specifically focusing on the massive discrepancies I had suspected since I left home. David promised to expedite the investigation and secure the official banking records to build an airtight defense against any potential civil claims they might attempt to file against my new estate. Following David's strict legal counsel, I spent the following days actively securing hard copies of all necessary evidence to protect myself. I thoroughly printed out hundreds of pages of official bank statements, utility bill payments, and historical transaction receipts that clearly documented my financial independence. More importantly, I secured the official trust fund documentation that David managed to extract from the archival bank databases. I methodically organized these highly sensitive legal papers and carefully placed all of them inside a sturdy pink box I found in my storage closet. I arranged every single document in chronological order so I could easily present the undeniable facts without hesitation. I set this pink box directly onto the center of my living room glass table. I knew Mom would eventually show up at my address to forcefully claim what she believed was hers, and I was fully prepared to face the inevitable confrontation. Back to the present moment, exactly 5 minutes after the loud knocking on my front door. Courtney arrogantly stepped right over the threshold without waiting for an invitation or acknowledging my presence. She completely ignored my defensive posture and marched directly into the center of my apartment like she already owned the place. She scanned the modern interior with a deeply envious glare before her eyes immediately locked onto the expensive, genuine leather sofa anchoring my spacious living room area. She pointed her manicured finger sharply at the heavy furniture piece and loudly barked her orders at the two hired men trailing closely behind her. "Pull that sofa out first. I want it placed in my new living room today," she commanded with an unbearable sense of entitlement. The two burly men adjusted their thick lifting straps and began walking toward my living room to execute her ridiculous instructions. I quickly noticed the bright blue moving company logo prominently printed across the chest of their matching uniform shirts. I subtly shifted my gaze and caught sight of a plastic name tag securely pinned to the shirt of the taller man standing closest to me, clearly identifying his identity as Marcus. His coworker walking just a few steps behind him had the name Dean stitched onto his jacket. They were just ordinary hourly workers hired to do a heavy job, completely unaware that they were currently being dragged into a fraudulent property theft scheme orchestrated by my toxic relatives. I instantly stepped forward and physically blocked Marcus from taking another step toward my expensive furniture. I reached for the official property ownership certificate I had prepared earlier and pulled out the crisp legal document. I thrust the paper directly in front of his face, making absolutely sure he could clearly read my full legal name printed at the very top as the sole registered owner of the condominium. I stared directly into his confused eyes and delivered a firm legal warning that shattered their momentum. "Listen to me, Marcus. You are standing on my private property without the homeowner's consent. If you guys move even a single item, I will call the police immediately," I stated with absolute, unwavering authority. The severe legal implications of my words hit the two working men instantly. They fully understood the serious consequences of participating in an illegal home invasion and potential grand theft under strict Texas property laws. Marcus immediately froze in his tracks and exchanged a highly concerned look with Dean. Without saying a single word to my demanding relatives, both men simultaneously dropped their heavy lifting straps straight onto the hardwood floor and took two large steps backward toward the hallway. They crossed their arms and completely refused to proceed with the moving job, clearly wanting absolutely nothing to do with this messy civil dispute. My decisive intervention completely derailed their calculated robbery plan. Courtney stomped her feet hard against the floor in a pathetic, childish tantrum when she realized the workers were no longer obeying her authoritative commands. She frantically looked back at our mother for immediate backup, her face turning bright red from the humiliating rejection in front of strangers. Mom completely lost her temper and started screaming vicious insults at the top of her lungs to quickly regain control of the narrative. She frantically waved her arms and aggressively accused me of being a cold-hearted, selfish daughter who was maliciously abandoning her own flesh and blood. I simply reached out and firmly pressed the electronic deadbolt lock on my front door, trapping them inside for a direct confrontation they would severely regret. 15 minutes passed in a suffocating atmosphere filled with relentless insults. Mom continued her aggressive verbal assault, pacing across the room while projecting her toxic anger. She repeatedly called me an ungrateful daughter who lacked basic family loyalty. I completely ignored her hysterical screaming and walked silently toward the sleek wooden cabinet against the far wall. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a thick folder containing every single bank transfer receipt I had meticulously documented over the past 5 years. These were not fabricated numbers randomly typed onto a spreadsheet. These were undeniable legal financial records proving exactly how much I had sacrificed for the woman currently shouting at me. I carried the heavy folder back to the center of the room and stood directly across from my raging mother. Without saying a single word to interrupt her tirade, I opened the file and began slowly spreading the paper receipts across the glass coffee table. I deliberately placed each document side by side, creating an undeniable visual timeline of my financial contributions. I laid out the expensive medical bills I had covered during her unexpected hospital stay 3 years ago. Next to those, I placed the massive contractor invoices for the brand new roof she desperately needed last winter. I then lined up dozens of monthly statements proving I had consistently paid for her life insurance premiums, her soaring electricity bills, and her basic utility costs while I was living states away, trying to build my own independent life. The sheer volume of paperwork quickly covered the entire glass surface, completely silencing Mom mid-sentence. She stared down at the undeniable proof of my financial support, her face suddenly draining of color as her authoritative posture collapsed. I pointed firmly at the highlighted totals aggressively printed at the bottom of the bank statements. The total amount of money I had directly transferred into her bank account over the last half-decade amounted to well over $150,000. This massive reality completely crushed the ridiculous $187,000 fabricated Excel spreadsheet she had emailed me a week ago. Her entire extortion scheme was actively falling apart right in front of the stunned moving crew. In total, I have transferred $150,000 to you for medical bills and insurance, so do not speak to me about that ridiculous parenting invoice anymore. I stated with absolute cold precision. Mom stammered nervously, frantically trying to cover up her exposed greed by waving her hand dismissively. She argued that those massive payments were simply my basic duty. A small repayment for the gift of life she had supposedly given me. Courtney immediately recognized the shifting power dynamic and rapidly stepped away from our mother. She raised both hands defensively, desperately trying to distance herself from the undeniable financial exploitation. "That is not my business. I had no idea Mom took your money to fix the house," Courtney yelled, shamelessly throwing our mother under the bus to protect her own victim narrative. I coldly watched their pathetic display of shifting blame and total lack of accountability. They were turning on each other the exact second hard evidence was presented. I reached out and methodically gathered the scattered paper receipts back into a neat stack, slipping them safely back into the folder. I looked directly into my mother's panic-stricken eyes and bluntly declared that despite these documented payments, there were still massive amounts of money that had mysteriously vanished over the years without any logical explanation. I told her I knew exactly where those hidden funds went. That was the exact moment I reached down and firmly placed the small pink box directly onto the center of the glass table. Half an hour of intense confrontation finally compressed to its absolute breaking point. I slowly lifted the lid off the small pink box, resting securely on the center of the glass table, and reached inside with perfectly steady hands. I carefully pulled out a pristine, thick stack of official bank statements that David had meticulously gathered directly from the archival financial institutions over the past week. These specific legal documents detailed the exact transaction history of a massive trust fund totaling exactly $500,000, a highly secure account explicitly established by my grandfather exclusively to guarantee my future education and financial well-being long before he passed away. I deliberately dropped the heavy stack of papers next to the previous receipts, letting the loud slap of paper echo through the room. The undeniable paper trail now spread across the table clearly highlighted exactly how Mom had severely abused her legal authority as the designated financial trustee. The heavily highlighted banking records alongside highly questionable authorization signatures proved without a single shadow of a doubt that she had secretly diverted the protected assets for entirely unauthorized purposes. She had methodically executed these illicit offshore wire transfers the exact moment Courtney faced a devastating personal bankruptcy several years ago. Mom had actively chosen to drain an irrevocable trust account dry rather than let her golden child experience the natural legal consequences of her own terrible financial decisions and failed business ventures. "Did you really think I didn't know you used your trustee power to drain grandfather's $500,000 just to save Courtney's bankrupt company?" I demanded, my voice slicing sharply through the heavy silence of the living room and leaving no room for any further deception. I explicitly named her calculated crime, loudly declaring it a severe breach of fiduciary duty right to her face, so everyone present could fully understand the sheer magnitude of her ongoing theft. I systematically broke down exactly how she had illegally pumped every last cent of my designated inheritance directly into Courtney's miserably failing corporate accounts. Mom had deliberately sacrificed my entire financial foundation, ruthlessly stealing $500,000 just to artificially prop up her favorite daughter's disastrous entrepreneurial mistakes, while simultaneously leaving me to drown in massive student loan debt during my hardest years. This is a federal breach of fiduciary duty, and my lawyer already has every single cash flow statement in his hands. I stated with lethal composure, aggressively tapping the undeniable printed proof with my index finger to emphasize the inescapable reality of her situation. Mom's face instantly drained of all remaining color the second those specific legal terms and the absolute certainty of my attorney's involvement left my mouth. The arrogant, demanding posture she had fiercely maintained all morning completely shattered into pieces when she fully realized the comprehensive financial tracking was already finalized, officially documented, and sitting safely in a law office. She physically stumbled backward, her legs suddenly struggling to support her weight against the crushing reality of her exposed actions. Her eyes widened in absolute, unfiltered panic as the heavy, inescapable weight of impending legal consequences, massive financial restitution, and potential federal prison time finally crashed down upon her trembling shoulders. Beside her, Courtney began violently trembling and desperately clutched her head with both shaking hands. The sickening realization slowly washed over her pale features as she mentally processed the horrific truth about her past miraculous financial bailouts. She suddenly understood that the generous monetary rescue she had recklessly spent over the years to maintain her luxurious lifestyle was actually illegal money stolen directly from her own younger sister. The protective, privileged illusion she had comfortably lived inside for her entire adult life was completely obliterated by the undeniable paper trail currently exposing them both as undeniable accomplices in a massive, unforgivable financial crime. 45 minutes had passed since they aggressively stepped over my threshold. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was only broken by the rustling of paper as I reached my hand deep into the very bottom of the pink storage box. My fingers purposefully bypassed the remaining legal folders and firmly grasped a small, hard plastic object intentionally hidden underneath all the financial documents. I slowly pulled out an obsolete, heavily scratched flip phone with severely peeling silver paint and a visibly cracked exterior screen. I held the worthless piece of outdated technology up high under the bright living room lights so every single person present could clearly examine the pathetic device. I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes and coldly reminded her of the incredibly bitter reality surrounding my 18th birthday celebration. That was the exact same year she had completely drained my designated $500,000 inheritance to secretly fund my older sister's luxurious lifestyle and failing corporate ventures. Yet, while hundreds of thousands of dollars were being illegally wired out of my legitimate trust account, this broken phone was the absolute only birthday gift Mom ever bothered to hand me. It was not even a cheap new purchase from a discount store, but merely a discarded piece of electronic trash that Courtney had carelessly thrown away into the garbage bin after aggressively demanding an upgrade to a much better model. The brutal, sickening contrast between the massive financial fortune they had maliciously stolen from my future and this literal piece of garbage fully exposed the absolute depths of their bottomless greed. Their meticulously crafted facade of a caring, responsible family completely disintegrated right there in my living room, revealing nothing but pure, unadulterated hypocrisy to the outside world. They had ruthlessly treated me like a disposable banking asset for years, while simultaneously forcing me to accept their literal garbage with a forced smile of gratitude. Marcus and Dean had been standing quietly by the hallway entryway, completely paralyzed as they witnessed this horrifying family drama rapidly unfold. They had undoubtedly seen many crazy family disputes during their moving careers, but this specific situation was entirely different. The sheer psychological cruelty of presenting a financially robbed teenager with a piece of discarded trash was simply too much for the seasoned mover to process silently. He stared directly at the scratched flip phone resting heavily in my palm, with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust directed entirely at my mother. The profound absurdity of her maternal actions finally broke his professional restraint. "Wait, this is what she gave you after $500,000 disappeared." Marcus blurted out, his deep voice laced with profound disbelief and highly damaging judgment that sharply cut through the remaining tension. That single brutally honest comment from a complete stranger was the definitive final blow that completely shattered Courtney's fragile psychological defenses. The overwhelming public humiliation and the terrifying impending reality of becoming an active accessory to a major federal financial crime caused her to instantly collapse under the immense pressure. She broke down into violent, hysterical sobs, aggressively stepping away from our mother, as if the older woman was suddenly highly contagious. In a desperate, deeply pathetic attempt to completely absolve herself of any legal or moral responsibility, Courtney turned her tear-streaked face toward me and screamed at the top of her lungs to save her own skin. She did it herself. Mom lied to me. I had no idea that was Shannon's trust fund money. She shrieked hysterically, frantically, pointing a trembling finger directly at the exact woman who had sacrificed absolutely everything to unlawfully protect her. The final 10 minutes determined the boundaries of a completely shattered family. I stared intensely at the two women standing completely paralyzed in the center of my living room and delivered a freezing, non-negotiable ultimatum that left absolutely zero room for further discussion. I explicitly gave them exactly 30 seconds to turn around, gather whatever remaining dignity they possessed, and walk straight out of my apartment before I directly dialed emergency services to report a hostile home invasion by aggressive trespassers. I held my cell phone firmly in my right hand, with my thumb deliberately hovering over the screen, making it incredibly clear to both of them that my patience had entirely expired, and I was absolutely not making an empty threat to simply scare them. Before either of them could even attempt to formulate another pathetic emotional excuse or beg for unwarranted mercy based on our shared genetics, I delivered the ultimate devastating blow regarding their rapidly impending legal nightmare. I formally announced that David had already successfully completed the preliminary civil lawsuit documentation required to forcefully recover the stolen trust fund assets. I explicitly informed my mother that the comprehensive legal brief detailing her exact financial crimes was currently sitting securely on his desk, simply waiting for my official authorizing signature to immediately initiate a devastating federal investigation. I wanted her to know that her financial ruin was no longer just a distant possibility, but a guaranteed reality moving forward at maximum speed. The sheer paralyzing terror of severe legal consequences and the highly realistic threat of serving actual federal prison time finally materialized on Mom's suddenly pale, horrified face. The incredibly arrogant, commanding posture she had aggressively maintained since violently knocking on my front door earlier that morning evaporated completely into the heavy air. She began trembling violently from head to toe, her hands shaking so incredibly badly that she could barely maintain a grip on the leather straps of her expensive designer handbag. She finally understood with absolute clarity that her deeply manipulative maternal authority possessed absolutely zero power inside a legitimate courtroom against undeniably hard financial evidence and a ruthless legal team. Recognizing that the intense family dispute was definitively over and firmly resolved in my absolute favor, Marcus and Dean immediately stepped forward to properly conclude their highly frustrating morning. Marcus crossed his muscular arms across his chest and sternly demanded that Mom immediately pay their mandatory service cancellation fee using direct physical cash right there on the spot. He strategically shifted his stance to physically block her direct path toward the exit hallway, loudly refusing to let either trembling woman leave the premises until his professional moving company was properly compensated for the entirely wasted time and the fraudulent job booking. Utterly humiliated and completely defeated on every single conceivable level, Mom frantically dug through her leather wallet with violently shaking fingers, while Courtney continued crying silently beside her in pure, unadulterated shame. They awkwardly handed over the demanded cash bills to the imposing movers and slowly shuffled out of my beautiful apartment without daring to utter a single word of defense or offer a fake apology. The exact second their shoes fully crossed the threshold into the public hallway, I aggressively slammed the heavy wooden door shut and immediately engaged the electronic deadbolt lock. The sharp, decisive click of the metal security mechanism echoed beautifully through my quiet living room, officially severing those deeply toxic blood ties forever, and finally securing my ultimate peaceful freedom. I leaned my back against the solid wood, taking a deep, cleansing breath as the chaotic noise of their presence was entirely replaced by the comforting silence of my own home. I had successfully protected my hard-earned sanctuary, completely turning their malicious greed into the exact weapon that permanently destroyed their control over my life. Lessons learned. This story serves as the clearest proof that blood ties should never be used as a convenient shield to cover up blatant financial exploitation. Setting sharp legal boundaries, fiercely protecting your personal assets, and bravely cutting ties with those who exploit you in the name of family is entirely justified. When toxic relatives view you strictly as an ATM rather than a loved one, removing them from your life is not a betrayal, but an act of essential self-preservation. Financial independence is undeniably the most powerful weapon you can possess to successfully defend yourself against any form of toxic manipulation. Never hesitate to walk away and lock the door on the people who continuously try to drain your spirit and your bank account. Thank you so much for listening until the very last moments of today's story. Using the law to counter family greed is a drastic but absolutely necessary action. What do you think about Shannon's firm resolution and her ultimate revenge? Please leave your thoughts down in the comments section below, and do not forget to subscribe to catch our next videos.